Designs. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share with you some happy mail from the Stamps of Life. It is their card kit from the month of October for 2019, and I haven't opened it yet, so I'm going to open it right now with all of you. We'll go over the contents and then I'm going to make some cards. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so we've got a stamp set and it says, "I'm here for you. Call me anytime you need a friend. Time to celebrate you. Sending a note of thanks. Happy birthday greetings, and where would I be without you?" So all of their kit clubs usually come with a pack of sentiment stamps, and these are the ones for October. Very cute. And then we have some gems in holiday Christmas colors. Some silver, red, green, and then a lighter green, like a turquoise. There's also a die set. It's a sentiment just because. It comes with the shadow layer and the words. Oh, these are so cute. These look like flowers. They almost look like a hair bow. I remember my daughter, she used to buy these all the time at craft fairs, and then she got into making them. But those are really cute. Those are Christmas colors, and they have a button in the middle, and there's a pack of 4. And then there's some twine. This twine, it looks like it's gray and white twine. And then we have some ribbon. It is brown and white checkerboard. And then we have some chipboard, some snowflake chipboard, and this almost looks like a very light silver ribbon. That's really pretty. And of course the idea card, different ideas of what you can do, different cards that you can make with it. And then the 6x6 paper pad. All their card kits come with a paper pad designed for the monthly stamp set, which I'll show you in just a moment. This is the Just Because collection, and it has the leaves. These are really cute. They're different color greens. It's a lighter green and then a darker green of the leaves that go with their pine cone stamp, again, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then the stars, there's pine cones, there are more stars, and then these are cut apart, so you can use their die set that came with this month to die cut these out. That's really pretty, the tree. And then more stars, happy holidays, some snowflakes, some more stars and leaves, pine cones, polka dots. And then those are really pretty, the ruffled edges there, lines, some more snowflakes and stars. There's a gray tree bark. And then it starts back over again. You get 2 of each paper, and I love their paper pads because these paper pads, they're not thin. These are actually thick paper, and they hold up really well. So I love that. And then it also comes with a storage envelope that you can store all your stuff in, with cardstock as well as envelopes. So looking at their cardstock, some of the colors that they have here go along with the 6x6 paper pad. So I believe this is the sea glass color, the lighter of the blue, and then the ocean, I believe, is the darker of the blue. I'm almost positive. Don't quote me on that. And then we have the cranberry, which is the darker red, and then we have the kiwi, which is the lighter green, and then the artichoke, which is the darker green, and then the cloud, which is a gray, ginger snap, chocolate, and then there's a few pieces here of the powdered sugar, which is the white. So that is what came in their card kit club for October. And I will link down below if you're interested in joining the card kit. I'll put a link to that on their website, and you can go and check that out. I do want to quickly show you the stamp set for the month of October, and let me put some of this back, and that is the pine cone to stamp, or pine cones to stamp. And it looks like this. It has some bigger pine cones and then some of the leaves, a smaller pine cone. Has a few sentiments here. You are so pine, happy holidays, I pine for you, warm birthday wishes to you. And the matching die set, as well as there's a sentiment die that says season's greetings in here. So this is for October. So you can, I'm also part of their Die Hard Club, which comes with the stamps and the dies. So I get this on that ships out on the 1st of the month, and then this ships out on the 15th of the month. So I'll link this below. If you're interested in joining, you can check their website out. But I do want to show you that their die set, it obviously matches their pattern paper pad for the month. And the sheet that looks like this, you can actually take these dies and you can take the shadow layer and die cut these pieces out. So if you don't like to color, you can use the pattern paper pad and die cut these items out. They're the same as what their stamps are, only they're already colored for you. And there's 2 sheets of this in the paper pad, which we will use this today to do some cards. So let's go ahead and make some cards. I'm gonna start off by die cutting these items, and I'm just going to take my shadow layer of my dies and put them over top, and I'm going to get all of these out because I know I'm going to use these with my cards. So I'm gonna go ahead and die cut all of these, again using just the shadow layer of the monthly stamp set, pine cones to stamp. And there is a small one. Okay, so there's a large and a small leaf. So I'm gonna die cut all of these out. And then I'm just going to use some washi tape just to hold these in place. And then I'm gonna run those through my die cut machine. And I'm gonna do it for all of them. So I'm gonna have to run it through a few different times. And here are all my pieces that are die cut.
So starting with my first card, I'm using chocolate cardstock and powdered sugar cardstock, and I use 2 rectangle dies to cut those out. I am using a sentiment from the sentiment stamp set that came with the card kit, and I'm stamping that with chocolate Stamps of Life ink. Stamping that at the bottom portion of the powdered sugar cardstock, and then using glue to apply that and add that to the chocolate rectangular layer. Then I'm taking that layer, adding more glue to the back, and adding that to my pine cone patterned paper. The pine cone paper is measured at 4 3/16 by 5 7/16. Then I'm taking that layer and applying it to an A2 size card base that's cut out of the chocolate cardstock, using glue to apply that. And then I'm going to take the leaves that I cut out of the pattern paper using my shadow dies from the monthly pine cones to stamp die set. So cut those out of the pattern paper and applying those here to the front. I did use a couple of the longer leaves and a few of the smaller ones, and then also the pine cones. So I love how everything matches. I think those are so pretty how they match the pattern paper. So they're just adding the second pine cone, tucking the leaf underneath, and then adding the second pine cone. And then after that, I am going to be using the ribbon that came with the card kit, the brown gingham ribbon, and just tying that in a bow. And once I get that down to the size that I want it, I just snip off the ends in a diagonal shape. And then I'm going to use my hot glue gun to adhere that bow to the front of the card. And for the inside of the card, I did cut a piece of the powdered sugar cardstock, and I'm using my Misty stamping tool. I'm sorry this is out of frame, but I'm taking another sentiment here from the stamp set, Call Me Anytime You Need a Friend, and stamp that in chocolate ink for the inside layer of the inside of the card. and then just applying that with glue. And that completes this first card. So for this next card, I'm using the Ginger Snap cardstock, and I cut the shadow layer of the pine cone large die, and then the piece that goes on top was cut with the chocolate cardstock. And here I'm just using some Tombow liquid glue, applying it to the top piece, and then adhering it to the shadow layer. If I would have done this over again, I probably would have ran that through the die cut with the double-sided adhesive on it first to make it easier to stick down. This piece of pattern paper is measured at 4 3/16 by 5 7/16, and that just goes on top of a A2 size card base. And the A2 size card base is in the Ginger Snap. And then here's a piece of powdered sugar cardstock cut with a circle die, and then I just inked up the edges with the chocolate ink. And here I'm taking the Just Because sentiment that came in the card kit, and I'm cutting that out with my Diamond Press small handheld die cut machine, using the chocolate and the Ginger Snap cardstock. The Ginger Snap is used to cut the shadow layer, and the chocolate is cut the letters. One thing about this die cut is it actually cuts out individual letters. They're not connected, so you have to take each individual letter out and put it on separately. So it did take a little bit of time to do that because they weren't connected. So with this die cut, because I wanted it to be inside the circle, I had to cut it down the middle, and then I just rounded the corners with my scissors because I wanted this to be on two separate lines. I didn't want it on one line across the way the die cut initially came out, because it would have exceeded the width of the circle. So here I'm just adhering it to the center of the circle using my glue. And then I take my pine cones, and I had also die cut out the leaves. And I used the artichoke paper and the kiwi paper to die cut those, and I cut some small and some large leaves in various of the two shades of color. And then I'm just kind of placing them here where I want them to go, and then I put some double-sided tape on the back of the pine cone and adhered that down. And I found that because I used the tape, it was easier to stick the leaves underneath the pine cone. If I would have used glue on the pine cone, the entire thing would have been adhered down, and it would have been harder to get those leaves underneath it. So again, using tape and the bottom pine cone, and then I'm able to stick those down. Again, just putting them here for placement. Once I decide on placement, I then can apply some of the glue to the back of the leaves. And this helps using the glue, because if I don't want the entire leaf stuck down, I don't have to apply glue to the entire thing. And here's my finished card. For my next card, I'm using the Pine Cones to Stamp set, and I'm taking the leaves and I am just placing them on my powdered sugar cardstock, which is located there in my MISTI, and which is my stamping tool. And I did put a piece of scratch paper underneath because I didn't want the ink to go onto the MISTI platform. So the excess that's going over the edges will just go on the scrap paper. And I am using the artichoke ink to stamp these leaves up. And I'm just placing them in random spots around my, or I should say on my paper. And the nice thing about the MISTI is that if you don't get a clean, crisp image the first time you press it down, you can do it again because it stays in the same spot. So I went ahead and I'm just using leaves for this. I'm actually making my own patterned paper, just using the leaves from the stamp set to do this. And here's what it looks like when it's finished. So here I'm taking the pine cone stamp. It's the actual background part of the stamp, and I am using the chocolate ink to ink that up, and I have a strip here which is measured by 2 2 by 5.5, which I'm going to ink up 3 of these pine cones across the strip. And just want to go back to the other piece that I had inked up with the leaves. That piece was measured at 4 by 5.5. So here, just placing these in the MISTI, stamping these a few times to get a clear impression. Again, this is the chocolate ink. Now I'm taking the other stamp in the set and I'm placing it over. It's like the outline of the pine cone, so I'm placing it over and then grabbing it with the MISTI platform and inking it up with the ginger snap. So it has the 2-color ink on those stamps. It's just filling in all of those white gaps, and I think it turned out really, really pretty. I really liked the stamp. So I do that 3 times, again just making sure that it's placed over that so it's got a good impression. And then I am going to take a piece of cranberry cardstock, and the cranberry cardstock is measured 2 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm adhering that to the inked up pattern paper that I created and just cutting off the excess. I'm taking the Happy Holidays stamp and I am placing this whole layer in my MISTI, and I am going to use my cranberry ink and ink up the Happy Holidays stamp and stamp it right at the top of this piece of stamped paper. Then I'm going to go ahead and take that strip of pine cones and I'm adding some glue. This is the Tombow liquid glue. Just adding a little bit to the bottom of those pine cones. And then I'm going to use a chunky glitter by Lawn Fawn. It's their chunky glitter. And just add that to the top of the glue. And when I shake that off, it will just shake off the excess and then just keep the glitter in the spots where the glue was. I think that adds a really nice touch. Looks like a little bit of snow on those pine cones. Then I go ahead and add glue to that panel and apply it to a cranberry piece of cardstock that is cut just a little bit smaller than the A2 size card base, which is 4 3/16 by 5 7/16, and then I apply that entire panel to an A2 size card base out of the powdered sugar cardstock. And then I'm applying the strip that has the pine cones to the center of the red strip, and that is going to complete that card. Now, if I would have done this over, I probably would not have stamped all of those leaves in the center where the Happy Holiday sentiment is, because I think that Happy Holiday sentiment is a little bit hard to read. But overall, I like how the pine cones turned out. I think they look nice. For this next card, I'm using the die grid number 2, and I'm using the snowflake pattern paper, and I'm going to cut just the grid portion out of the snowflake. These pieces that came out, I'm going to set those aside to use them with my card, and the grid piece for the snowflake paper I don't need. I also cut the grid out with the powdered sugar cardstock, and that's the piece that I'm going to use. The white powdered sugar pieces that came out of that grid, you can just save those for another project. And here I'm taking a piece of the cranberry paper and I'm adhering it to a powdered sugar card base, the A2 size card base, and I'm applying glue to the powdered sugar frame and adding that to the top of the card. The cranberry cardstock is cut at 5 7/16 by 4 3/16. Next, I'm taking all of those snowflake rectangles that came out of the grid and I'm adding them back to the card, as you see here. And then I'm using my pine cones. I did die cut the pine cones. I used the chocolate for the shadow and the ginger snap paper for the front piece. And I'm using some of the Lawn Fawn chunky glitter and adding it to the bottom of, actually to the entire pine cone. So I just apply glue to the whole top, sprinkle the chunky glitter on there, and then let that dry. I'm also using the chocolate, I'm sorry, not the chocolate. I'm using the Ginger Snap ink as well as the artichoke ink, and I'm just inking up some of those die cut leaves just to add a little bit more color. And then I'm going to add some of the Lawn Fawn chunky glitter to those leaves as well. So again, just adding some glue to the top, sprinkling on some of the glitter, and then dusting off the rest, just, flicking off the rest, the excess. And then I applied double-sided adhesive to the pine cone, adding it to the bottom center of the card, and then just adding some glue to the back of those leaves and tucking it under the pine cone and adding them as you see here. So my whole goal for this card is that I wanted this to look like a window scene with it snowing in the background and maybe, the pine cone like a little centerpiece sitting on the front of the windowsill. And I think this turned out super cute. So I'm using my stamping block just to hold those in place while they dry. And then just adding some more of the leaves. I did use the leaves in the artichoke paper as well as the ginger snap paper, so I cut those out with those. And then here I'm just cut a strip of the cranberry cardstock, adding some double-sided adhesive to the back. And I used this Merry Christmas die to cut that out. It's a very intricate die. You can see that the letters are really thin. And then I just added that right across the top of that card. And I think that turned out super cute. So here I'm just adding a little bit more glue to the bottom, sprinkling some more glitter just to add a little bit more snow, a more snowy look. And that completes this card. For my next card, I'm using a card base in the kiwi paper. That's the A2 size. I'm also using the cranberry paper, which is measured at 3 3/4 by 5.5. And then I'm also using the striped paper from the pattern paper pad, and that's measured at 3.5 by 5.5. And I'm attaching the striped pattern paper to the front of the cranberry cardstock, just adhering that with some liquid glue. And then you can see here I actually had to cut off the excess of that pattern paper just so that it fit evenly onto the cardstock. Then I'm taking my dies and I die cut a shadow layer of the pine cone, the large pine cone with the ginger snap cardstock. And I used the chocolate cardstock to cut the front top layer. And I'm just positioning them on the front of this panel. And I'm going to make them look like they are Christmas ornaments just hanging down from the top of the card. And I'm going to use these really pretty bows that were included in the card kit for this card. And the strip that you see there laying on the half of the pattern paper there, it's just a piece of chocolate cardstock cut in a very small strip because I wanted to use that to make it look like the string for the ornament. Here I'm just positioning where I want these to go. So I went ahead and added the adhesive to the back of the pine cone, positioned that. Now I'm adding the adhesive to that chocolate strip. And I don't have measurements for this. It's just a really thin strip of cardstock that I just cut, and here I'm just placing it underneath the pine cone, making sure it's straight, and then snipping off the excess. And then I'll use some of that excess for the next pine cone ornament. So here I'm adding the second pine cone ornament, again just positioning them where I want them to be before I actually adhere them. I'm going to use my double-sided tape, and I'm using the tape instead of the glue just because it leaves a little bit of room so that I can, pick up the die cut and insert the strip piece underneath because it's not fully adhered to the layer. So here adding some liquid glue, applying that strip, and cutting off the excess, and that excess piece obviously will be thrown in the garbage. And then that entire piece is going to be glued down to the top of the A2 size card base. I went ahead and also cut out a piece of the cranberry paper and a piece of the powdered sugar. And I just cut these down. I don't have any specific measurements on this. I had to just trim them down. I did use the Peace on Earth stamp, which is from the Christmas Tree to Stamp set. And I'm just adding those layers as you see. Again, I just had to cut them according to size just to make sure that they weren't going off of the card. So again, I don't have any specific measurements on that. And then just using my hot glue gun and adding those ribbons there to the top. I think that turned out really, really pretty. I didn't know what I was going to do with those ribbons, and then it dawned on me I can use them for the Christmas ornament pine cones. So I think those are really, really cute. I did add some thin foam adhesive to the back of that sentiment just to pop it up a little bit and place it there at the bottom left-hand corner of the card. Next, I took some of these gems and I'm using the red, and I just added a few to the card. And now the card is complete. For my next card, I'm using the Snowflake A2 background die set. And I'm also using the cloud cardstock and the sea glass cardstock. Actually, not the sea glass, the ocean cardstock. And then I'm going to cut the cloud paper out of the snowflake die. Now, when you cut this out, you have to make sure that that large rectangle piece is over top of the actual snowflake die so that it cuts the die out of the paper. If you just leave it in, if you just use the snowflake die without the large rectangular piece, it will cut the snowflake into the paper without actually cutting out the piece like you see there. So once it comes out of the die cut, you actually have to take out all those little pieces of snowflakes, but save them because you can use them later on to use them with your card. So I'm using the ocean cardstock as the A2 size card base, and I was going to layer that gray snowflake paper on top. You'll see later on that I decided I didn't like the gray with the ocean, and I changed it to white. I'm using the pattern paper that you see here for the Season's Greetings die, and the pattern paper is going to be cut with the shadow, and then I'm using a piece of the ocean cardstock, just putting some double-sided adhesive on it, and I'm going to run it through my die cut for the actual words Season's Greetings. So those I'm now applying to the shadow layer. And I like how that pattern paper shows up underneath those words. Those words are, the letters are actually pretty thin, so you can see those stars there in the background. I think that's really pretty. And luckily these letters are connected, unlike the Just Because die, which every letter was a single letter. These are connected, makes it easier to apply. I am using the Versamark ink pad, and I'm taking my snowflake chipboard that came with the card kit, and I'm applying the Versamark to the top of the snowflakes. And here I'm using some embossing powder. The colors I'm using are tinsel and poolside. The blue is the poolside, the tinsel is the silver, and I'm just adding some of each of those embossing powders to the top of the snowflakes. And I will link below where I got these embossing powders from. It was Sparkle and Sprinkle, which I know that they changed the name. They were bought out and changed the name, so I'll see if they have it, and I can link those below. I am using my heat tool just to emboss those, and I think that these snowflakes turn out really pretty. You can see that the mix of colors there, this between the silver and blue, and I do that for both of my snowflakes. Here's where I changed up that snowflake background die, and I instead of using the gray, I'm using the powdered sugar. I just think it makes the background pop a little bit more with the white against the ocean. So I just added some glue, and now I'm applying the Season's Greetings. This is the shadow layer, actually the actual shadow layer with the letters. And I'm applying that to the center, and then I'm just positioning where I want my snowflakes to go on the card. I want to make sure that they are not hanging off the edges. And then I'm just adding some glue to the back and adding those to the front of the card. And I think that turned out really, really pretty. So here I'm just using an acrylic block, a stamping block, just to hold that down. And this Tombow liquid glue, it actually worked really, really well holding this chipboard to the card. I wasn't sure about how well it was going to hold, but it did work very well. And then I took some of the snowflakes that when I die cut that paper for the front, these were the inside pieces, and I'm just adding some to the inside of the card just to add a little bit more decoration. And here's my completed card. For my next card, I'm using the Wreath to Stamp set, and I'm using the wreath from that stamp set. I'm using my Misty tool here to stamp that out in chocolate ink on the powdered sugar cardstock. And I do that twice because I want to have two wreaths, because when I use it on the card, I'm going to layer them just to make it look a little bit thicker. So again, the wreaths are stamped twice, and then I'm going to use the corresponding die cut to die cut those out. I also die cut the pine cone leaves and some of the pine cones from the Pine Cones to Stamp set. And these borders are actually from Stephanie Barnard die that she made for Sizzix, and I will link those below. And I cut those borders out of the chocolate cardstock. This is the Ginger Snap cardstock cut down to 3 by 4 3/16, and I did add some glue to that and applied it to that leaf pattern paper. That leaf pattern paper is measured at 5 7/16 by 4 3/16, and that is going to be the layer for the top of the card base. The card base is going to be an A2 size chocolate card base. Now I did have to pull some more of the chocolate paper from my stash because I did not have enough in the card kit. So this is chocolate paper from my stash that I am using with this card. Here I'm just applying glue to these borders, the little zigzag borders. I think they turned out really cute. I think they're adding some definition here between the layers. So I'm just adding some glue on top of those, holding them down with my acrylic block and cutting off the excess. And then I'm using the Happy Holidays stamp from the Pine Cones to Stamp. That is going to be stamped inside of that Ginger Snap. It will be inside the wreath, and that's using the chocolate Stamps of Life ink. So I ink that up a couple times just to make sure it gives me a good, nice impression. And then I'm going to apply some glue to the back of that card layer and add that to my A2 size chocolate card base. Then I'm going to add my 2 wreaths. They are going to be adhered with glue. I thought about using some pop dots to pop, one of the layers up, but the wreath is so thin that I would have had to spend a lot of time cutting the foam. So I'm just applying 2 wreaths just to add a little bit more, I guess, thickness, if you want to call it, to the wreath. And then I'm taking my leaf die cuts and I'm just placing them right now where I want them to go. I'm not applying glue yet. I just want to get a good placement, see where I want them. And once I have a placement, I am adding some glue, but not to the entire leaf. I'm just adding it to the bottom part because I do want this to have some dimension. I don't want everything to be flat against the card. So the top of the leaves are going to not have glue so they will be off of the card a little bit to add that dimension. And the leaves, I don't know if I mentioned, I did die cut those out of the artichoke, that's the darker green, and the kiwi, which is the lighter green. And I did cut 2 different size leaves, the small and the large. And for the pine cones, I stamped the small pine cone onto the ginger snap cardstock, and then I die cut those out using the corresponding small pine cone die cut. And I am applying some foam to the back of the top of the pine cone because when I added it to the leaf, I could not press it flat against the paper because of all the dimension with the leaves. So I just added some foam adhesive to the top just to make sure they were held in place. And I just added the 2 pine cones there to the top. I think that's all that this card needed. I did have another one there at the bottom, but I just saved that for another time. And then adding a few more leaves here, and that is going to complete this card. I think this card turned out really, really cute. I like how I was able to use another one of the stamp sets, kind of corresponded with this pine cone stamp set. So I think it turned out really nice. And obviously I had to add an inside layer to the card base. So if you recall the card that I made earlier with the stamped background of the leaves and the 3 pine cones on the front, and I wasn't crazy about the Happy Holidays being stamped on top of all of those leaves, so this is my attempt at redoing that card. And this time I'm taking a 5x5, it's going to be a 5x5 card base, but this layer is actually just slightly shorter than that, slightly smaller than that. And I'm just arranging some of these stamps from the pine cones to stamp set. I'm using the kiwi, the artichoke, and the chocolate ink to stamp these up. I am using my Misty because if I don't get a good impression the first time, I can stamp over it another time if I need to. And I'm just, positioning these in random spots on this paper and then grabbing it with the top plate of my Misty and stamping those. And then here I'm just using a stamping block for those, for the small red berry stamp, as well as for the small pine cones. And next I'm taking 2 of the square dies. The larger square die is cut with the cranberry paper, and then this powdered sugar is with the smaller square die. And I'm using the Happy Holidays stamp with the cranberry ink, stamping that on the powdered sugar. And then I wanted to use the leaf stamps and just kind of decorate the edges of that square cutout. So I'm using the artichoke and the kiwi just to apply some of the leaves to around the edges of that square. Now the card base is going to be a square card, again measured 5x5, and the powdered sugar, and then there's a layer of the cranberry that is measured at 4 7/8 by 4 7/8. And I did have to take some of the cranberry out of my stash because I did not have enough, because I added this after the fact. I am using some ribbon that I had in my stash from Stamps of Life ribbon, and just adding that around and taping it down, adding it around the card layer, taping it down, and applying some double-sided tape to that card layer, and then adding that whole layer to the card base. Now I ended up cutting 2 pieces of the cranberry cardstock out of the larger square die because I wanted to apply foam adhesive to it. So one is laid flat with the double-sided adhesive, and then the second layer has the foam on it, and that gives it a little bit of dimension. I did make a bow and use my heat tool to adhere that bow to the top of the card, and I think this one turned out really cute.
So here are all the cards that I created. We have the pine cone ornaments, which I absolutely love this card. I love these little ribbons that are attached to it. I think it's so pretty. This is probably one of my favorites, along with this Merry Christmas with the snowy Looks like it's in a windowsill. I really like this one as well. And then we have Just Because, the Just Because die, and the pine cones die cut, the leaves, and the pattern paper. We also have the Season's Greetings with the snowflake backdrop, and the chipboard, which I did the embossing powder on, and the Season's Greetings die. And we also have the Happy Holidays stamped, and then the pattern paper, and then some of the leaves die cut out. These aren't stuck all the way down, so it does add some dimension there. Really cute. Then we have this one, which is again the pattern paper, use of the paper pad with these die cuts cut out of the paper pad, and then the sentiment that we got with the card kit, I'm here for you, call me anytime you need a friend. And then we have these two. This is the updated version of this one. So this one, again, with the stamped images, stamped background, Happy Holidays. Again, I wish that I wouldn't have put those leaves back there, so then I redid it. Ended up doing a whole complete background and putting the Happy Holidays on the front, which I really like how this turned out with the ribbon and then the bow attached, and then the dimension for the sentiment. And this is a square shaped card. So hope you like all of my cards. Please comment, or if you have any questions, please leave them below. So please make sure you subscribe to my channel at Lisa Mears Card Designs, and I will be back soon with more card making inspiration. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye-bye.